I would be remiss if I did not mention your relationship and your first meeting with Arsene Wenger back at Highbury in 1989, where you subsequently ended up inviting him to a dinner party and playing charades. And it's a brilliant story, and when I'm aware you've told plenty of times before. I'd be curious, however, during that 7-year friendship that preceded his appointment at Arsenal, at what point did you come to the conclusion that this man is right for Arsenal?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I felt there was, right from the first time I met him, when we were playing that famous game of charades, and I'm not spiritual, but I saw in the sky, Arsene for Arsenal. It's going to happen one day. And at the time we had George Graham who was the manager, and we didn't realise that that season we were going to win the league at Anfield in sensational style in virtually the last kick of the season. So we were happy, of course, with George. And we actually, not many people realise this, but we had a false start, because when George left in 1994, I proposed Arsene to the board of Arsenal, and they rejected him at the time. They said, no, we want an English manager. We want somebody who understands the lower divisions. So we went for Bruce Rioch, and when that didn't work, Arsene by that time had taken himself off to Grand Passat in Japan, which was a brave move for him, leaving Western Europe, being at Monaco and being successful at Monaco, and then trying his luck going to Japan, which was a bit of a gamble for him, but he wanted to expand himself. And but luckily I kept in touch with him. So when Bruce didn't work out, I rang up Arsene in Japan. I said, Arsene, and I obviously cleared it with the board first. I said, look, if I'm going to speak to him, we're going to have to employ him. You're going to have to say yes. And he said, well, if you can bring him, we'll certainly take him on. So I rang up Arsene. I said, we've got another opportunity now, Arsene. I'm sorry what happened last time, but we're very, very serious, and we'll come and see you in Japan. He said, okay, well, fortunately I had a good relationship with him. He said, by all means, come across. So I went with a couple of my colleagues and to see him, and we discussed it, we agreed terms. He actually couldn't come at the time directly because it was just the start of the Japanese season, and he had a break in October. So whereas we were starting in August, he couldn't come till October 1996. So we obviously had to have a temporary stand in there, basically with Pat Rice holding fort until Arsene came.
I ask partly also because, with the benefit of hindsight, looking back, you seem to be able to make these key decisions that were at the time considered rather radical, whether it was appointing a little-known Wenger or the formation of the Premier League, appointing Sven-Göran Eriksson as the first foreign manager for England. What attributes or experiences can be considered into having that ability to have that foresight, whatever you might call it?
Yeah, I have my own personal motto, which in fact, as you know, I go around schools and indeed prisons these days going around giving, but I like to think of motivational talks. And I always tell my audience, I have a personal motto, and my motto is the motto of the turtle. The motto of the turtle is, you don't get anywhere unless you stick your neck out. You've got to take a chance. And we did. So bringing in Arsene was a gamble. And in fact, the headlines of the paper that day was Arsene who? People didn't know who he was. Everybody knows who he is now. In fact, 2 days ago, he was actually at the Vatican meeting the Pope. So I think everybody knows who he is.
What can you attribute that touch or feel to? Because for all your apparent success, you've also been described as, by Ian Wright, even as a father figure who was always close to the players and what have you. For all your obvious business acumen as well, it seems that you have that emotional intelligence as well. Where does that play into it all?
I think it's probably my family upbringing that I believed. I regarded every player we signed as an extension of my family. They were my children, and I wanted to know all about them to make sure they were okay, that they were settled, they had a nice house, a nice car, that they had, if they came from overseas, they had an English teacher assigned to them, that they were settling down well. And I took a personal interest in all of them. And And I think that was a warm relationship. If they had any problems, I would be here. My door was always open for the players to come to knock on my door to discuss anything, not just about contracts, which is always a tense situation, but anything else they may have, any domestic situation, domestic problems, because you're dealing with fairly young athletes, and they need direction from time to time.
And part of that success that you also had is recruiting top talent, whether that was on the board or on the pitch as well. Are there certain characteristics or qualities that you look for an appointee? Say if I were to come across, whether as a player or as an aspiring executive for that matter, that you look for?
I'm a great believer. There's an old saying, you only get one chance to make a good first impression. And I think that it's important that when you meet somebody for the first time, you get a positive vibe from them. You can tell whether the chemistry is good. And I felt that obviously with Arsene the first time I met him. I realised there was positive energy between us. And I think that's the same when we were signing players. I used to like to understand their backgrounds, what they're looking for, what their ambitions are, what they like, what they dislike, so we know how to handle them.
On that topic then, a topic of creating an organizational culture, which is a critical factor in any organization across industry, across sectors. Besides being deemed crazy at the time when you invested money into Arsenal back in '83, how did you approach that aspect of building a culture and all the way into the success that you had into the early 2000s?
I think much depends on also the relationship. It's very important. The biggest decision a board of a football club has to do is to appoint the manager. If you appoint a manager you get on with and you can work with, I think that's so important. And I'm afraid the length of time today in modern football, that a manager, a head coach, is less than a year. And so we would always try and understand a player, what they were like before we actually employed them. We wanted to know a lot about their background. We did a lot of due diligence on them.
Otto Rehhagel, the esteemed coach, he said that you have to win short term but plan long term. And you mentioned there in terms of managers not perhaps being given time and what have you, in that ever sought balance between the two. How does one navigate that as a chairman, as an owner?
Yes, it's always a problem, because today more than ever before, you're judged. The modern breed of owners want immediate success, and that's not easy. It's not as simple as just turning the tap and getting hot water. A team evolves. I mean, if you have a look at the way the Arsenal team is evolving at the moment, I mean, it's very exciting. And to get that group together is very, very clever management. You manage with stealth. You've got to make good decisions. The one word I always use, which is most important in football, is judgment. When a manager has to decide, is he going to buy a player or sell a player, he's got to use his own judgment. And he'll be, in the end, that will determine whether he stays or goes, because he'll be judged on his results. It's a pretty ruthless business.
Indeed, very, very, very tough indeed. And I can only imagine the consumption of that as well on an hourly, if not minute basis. How did you deal with that constant thinking, deliberation upon how to run a club? Because it must be rather testing.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm a fan, I think, and that's important. And it bothers me when you've got owners coming in who don't really understand the game. And obviously they learn, and there's two breed of owners these days. One is like myself, a passionate fan who put my money where my heart was. The other put their money in, and then their heart follows afterwards. So all of a sudden they become a Chelsea fan, or they'll become a Newcastle fan or whatever, right? Because the money goes in. Now both are okay, don't get me wrong. But in my case, I started going when I was 7, 8 years of age, going to Arsenal. So I was a devoted fan. So for me to be elevated into the boardroom, to be in a position of making a decision, was phenomenal for me. I mean, it was difficult to understand. But, I had 24 mainly glorious years at the club. and that's a pretty long time. Well, and Arsene himself had 22 years at the club.
How over the course of those 24 years and beyond that did you evolve as whether it be a leader, businessman, a person itself? What were some of the key lessons you learned on that way?
Yeah, I think you've got to always be a good listener. You've got to understand the other person's problems, what goes on. It's not straightforward at all, more than because you're dealing with high emotion, high octane. Everybody wants to win, and you only get one winner in the end, of a game. We may get a draw, of course, but by and large, it's a win or lose. It's you go out there and you want to win the game, and people. I always laugh when people say at the end of a speech, "May the best team win." They don't really mean that. They want to win, of course they do. So, yes, it's all about winning, and that's not easy because everybody you're playing against, they want to win as well. Mm-hmm. So the emotions run very high, and you've got to be able to control it, and you've got to not try and make emotive decisions straight after losing a game, because that's dangerous. You've always got to let the dust settle before you even talking to the press or anything. You've got to be very careful how you phrase your words so you don't get overexcited and say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. What is the most common misconception people would have of an owner or running a club, you reckon?
Yeah, I think the fans think that owning a club is easy, but it's far from being easy because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with, it's a results-based business, and probably the most misconception is that owners don't care. It's totally the opposite. Every owner is a fan eventually, whether they are a fan initially, but certainly when they've invested in the club, they become fans. They want their team to win, and they're putting a lot of money in. I've met many owners who put millions of pounds into football clubs and haven't had 1 minute's joy or success. So, and for them to get criticised is a bit unfair, because in the end, they've been let down by the results, by the coach, by the players, whoever it may be. So I think the owners are up there, and they are shot at very often when things go wrong. And I think sometimes it's a bit unfair, a bit unkind. But that's the business we're in.
As a leader, as a father, as a husband, what have you, what are your non-negotiables if you're leading people, for example, or leading a team?
I always expect respect. And it works both ways. I will always give everybody I'm speaking to the respect that they deserve, and I expect the same in return. And I also think, for me, I believe, and we're not seeing enough of it these days, or we're seeing less than we used to, or this comes to respect, is about honouring a contract. I think when players are under contract, they've got to be respected. And rather than just leaving because another club offers them more money, and it's tough, and that happens more and more these days. The players move around. There's not enough loyalty to the club, and I expect loyalty is probably a big word for me. And I know in Arsene's case, and he could have left, and take something like Patrick Vieira or Thierry Henry. Every year we had Real Madrid or Bayern Munich or Paris Saint-Germain coming in. We want Thierry, we want Patrick. That's tough. So loyalty is important to me.
And lastly, you were considered, absolutely critical to what we see of the modern Arsenal in terms of the Premier League and what have you, and with benefit of experience and age, so to speak. What advice would you give to aspiring executives, even current members who look to make that step into the executive level?
I think the first thing is you've got to understand the operation. And I know that virtually every week I would go round, whether it's to the box office or whether it was the junior gunners or whether it was to the media and communications department. I would actually go round and see how the other offices were working. I was interested to see, so I would say to the person running our junior gunners, how many members have you got at the moment? What about the travel club? How many people we got travelling to Manchester United next week? I'd want to know. Was I micromanaging? Maybe I was, but I was interested. It was all I wanted to know. I didn't want people to think that I wasn't interested in their affairs. So as you want to be a successful manager, understand what you're running. Understand that the business today is more complicated than ever before, and it's important you've got the right people in the right places, and that you make sure that they are comfortable, that they are happy, and any problems they have, you've got to know about them.